Imagine you are a little girl living in a giant, beautiful castle with big stone walls, shiny gold crowns, and hundreds of secret rooms. You think everything is like a fairy tale where everyone is always happy and kind. But sometimes, even in a real palace, people can say words that hurt more than a scraped knee. One sunny spring day, Princess Charlotte was at a big party with her whole family at Windsor Castle. She was trying her very best to be a good girl and follow all the rules. She was wearing a pretty dress and had a polite smile on her face. But then, Queen Camilla leaned in close to her. She whispered something to the little girl that made her smile disappear instantly. She didn't know that her mom, Princess Catherine, was watching her from across the big room. Catherine is usually a very quiet person who follows all the royal rules and never causes trouble. But Catherine is also a very brave mother, and when she saw her daughter looking sad and scared, she knew she had to do something. She saw a look in Charlotte's eyes that told her a secret was being kept. This is the true story of a secret battle that happened inside the royal family. It is a story about a mother who had to stand up to a queen to protect her child's heart. It shows us that no matter how many jewels or titles you have, being kind is the most important thing of all. Let's look at what really happened behind those heavy wooden castle doors and see how a mother's love changed everything for the royal family. It was a beautiful weekend in the spring, and everything at Windsor Castle seemed to be going exactly as planned. The royal family has a very busy calendar, and every single minute of their day is usually written down on a piece of paper. They have to go to many meetings and parties to help people and show that they are working hard for the country. This weekend was supposed to be a happy time for the family to be together. The weather was nice, the flowers were starting to grow in the gardens, and the castle looked very grand. However, Princess Catherine felt a little bit worried. Even though everything looked perfect on the outside, she felt like something was not quite right. Catherine has been a princess for a long time now, and she has learned to listen to the tiny voice inside her head. That voice is called her instinct. She trusts her instincts more than anything else, especially when it comes to her 3 children. She noticed that her daughter, Princess Charlotte, was acting a little bit different that morning. Usually, Charlotte is very bubbly and likes to talk and play. But that morning, she was very, very quiet. She wasn't being grumpy, and she wasn't being mean to her brothers. She was just staying very still and trying to be invisible, like she was trying to hide in the background so no one would notice her. Catherine knew this was not like her daughter at all. She wondered what could have happened to make such a happy girl want to be so quiet and small. The whole family had come to Windsor Castle for a special lunch. This lunch was a way to celebrate a group that Queen Camilla helps out. Queen Camilla has many groups she works with, and sometimes she likes to have the whole family come together to show their support. These family lunches happen quite often, but they can be a little bit difficult because there are so many people from different parts of the family. There were Queen Camilla's friends and family, Catherine's family, and many other cousins and aunts and uncles. Sometimes, all these different people don't really know how to talk to each other very well. Catherine was always very careful at these events. She wanted everyone to get along and follow the rules. Her husband, Prince William, was able to relax and talk to his father, King Charles. He felt comfortable because he had lived in castles his whole life. But Catherine felt like she had to be more like a lifeguard at a pool. She had to keep her eyes open and watch everything that was happening. She wanted to make sure her children were safe and behaving well, but she also wanted to make sure they were happy and not feeling overwhelmed by all the fancy people and big rooms. That afternoon, the adults decided that the children should sit in a separate room. They went to a smaller room called a salon that was right next to the big hallway. It was a very fancy room with big chairs and old paintings on the walls, but for the royal family, this was a normal place for kids to hang out. The royal cousins were all supposed to sit together, drink some tea, eat some snacks, and talk nicely to each other. The grown-ups expected the children to act like little adults. They wanted them to use their best manners and not make too much noise. Catherine walked Charlotte to her seat in the room. She made sure her dress was straight and gave her a sweet kiss on the forehead. Before she left the room, Catherine looked back one last time to make sure Charlotte was okay. Everything looked fine. The children were sitting down and getting ready to eat their snacks. It seemed like a normal, boring afternoon for the kids. Catherine went back to the big hall to talk to the other adults, but she still had that little feeling in her heart that she needed to keep watching. About 45 minutes later, something happened that changed the whole day. Catherine was standing in the big hall talking to an important man who works at the palace. While they were talking, Catherine saw something out of the corner of her eye. She saw Charlotte walking very fast down the long corridor. The little girl wasn't crying out loud, but her face looked very different than it did before. Her skin was very pale, and her mouth was pressed together in a very tight line, almost like she was trying very hard not to let a secret out. She didn't look like she had fallen down or hurt herself on the outside. She looked like her feelings had been hurt very badly. It was the kind of look a child gets when they feel very sad and alone. Catherine didn't even finish her sentence to the man she was talking to. She excused herself right away and started to follow her daughter. She found Charlotte standing all by herself at the very end of the hallway, near a big door that the workers use. The little girl had her hands squeezed together in front of her, and she was staring down at the floor as if she was trying to find an answer written on the stones. Catherine walked up to her daughter and knelt down so they were eye to eye. She spoke very softly and asked, "What happened, my sweet girl?" Charlotte didn't want to say anything at first. She looked at her shoes and whispered, "Nothing, Mommy, I'm okay." But Catherine knew her daughter was not okay. She put her hand on Charlotte's shoulder and said, "I can tell when something is wrong. You can tell me anything." Finally, Charlotte looked up at her mom and spoke in a tiny, shaking voice. She said, "Granny Camilla told me I was showing off. She told me I should be quiet and not speak unless a grown-up speaks to me first." Catherine felt a big shock in her heart. She blinked her eyes and asked, "Why would she say that?" Charlotte explained that they were playing a fun guessing game with her little brother Louis. When Louis didn't know the answer to a question, Charlotte told him what it was because she wanted to help him. It was just a game, but for some reason, Queen Camilla got very annoyed and told Charlotte she was being too loud and trying to act too smart. Catherine didn't say anything for a moment. She just pulled Charlotte into a big, warm hug. On the outside, Catherine looked very calm and steady, but inside she felt like everything had changed. She had always tried to be friends with Camilla and keep things peaceful, even when they didn't agree on things. But now, someone was being mean to her child, and that was something Catherine could not ignore. Catherine knew that Queen Camilla had very strict ideas about how children should act. Camilla thought that children should be very quiet and always do exactly what the older people said. Sometimes Camilla would smile when she said something mean, but her voice would sound very sharp. Catherine had seen this before, but she always thought Camilla would only act that way with the adults. She never thought Camilla would use those sharp words with a little girl. Later that day, the whole family went for a walk in the beautiful castle gardens. Catherine made sure to stay right next to Charlotte the whole time. Queen Camilla was walking further ahead with King Charles. She was laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened at all. She looked like she didn't have a single worry in the world. Catherine watched her very closely. It wasn't just about the one mean comment anymore. It was about the fact that Charlotte felt like she had to hide herself. After they finished their walk, everyone went back inside for more tea and snacks. Catherine kept a very close eye on her daughter. At one point, Charlotte reached her hand out to take a second scone from the table. Suddenly, Camilla turned around and looked down at her. With a little smile that wasn't very friendly, she said, "Maybe one scone is enough for you, darling. We don't want people to think you are greedy, do we?" When Catherine heard those words, she saw the truth very clearly. It wasn't just a mistake or a one-time thing. It was a pattern. A pattern is when someone does the same thing over and over again. These were small moments that might not seem like a big deal if they only happened once. But when the same person says mean things to the same child again and again, it becomes a very big problem. Catherine did not say anything to Camilla right then. She was not the kind of person who likes to start a fight in front of everyone. She was very careful and patient. But her silence was not because she was afraid. Her silence was because she was thinking and planning. She had seen enough, and she was done staying quiet. Her husband, William, hadn't noticed anything yet because he was busy talking to his father and some workers about their schedules. But Catherine knew that later that night, when they were back in their own house called Adelaide Cottage, she was going to have a very serious talk with him. She was a mother who had seen her child being hurt, and she was not going to let it happen ever again. Before that big talk could happen, something else occurred that made things even worse. Catherine never thought that being a princess would be easy. She knew that she had a big job to do and that many people were always watching her. She knew there were many secret rules she had to follow. She tried very hard to always look nice and act polite, even when things were hard behind the scenes. But there was one thing she would never, ever accept. She would never let anyone make her children feel small or unimportant. She especially wouldn't let someone inside the family treat them that way. The family had finished their tea, and the workers had cleared all the plates and cups away. The adults moved into a cozy sitting room to relax. This was an old tradition that the family had followed since the time of the old queen. The children were allowed to stay with the adults for a little while before their nannies came to take them upstairs to get ready for bed. Charlotte had walked into the room with her brothers, George and Louis. She looked very calm and didn't say much. She went to a big armchair by the fireplace and picked up a book from the shelf. She just wanted to sit quietly and look at the pictures. A few minutes later, Queen Camilla came into the room. She was holding a glass of water and laughing with one of her helpers. She seemed to be in a very good mood. She saw the children and gave them a quick smile, but then she went to talk to the other adults. After a little while, the room became a bit more quiet. George and Louis were standing by their grandfather, King Charles, and they were all talking about something interesting. Charlotte was still sitting in her chair with her book. Looked up and saw a beautiful piano in the corner of the room. Charlotte loves music and she is learning how to play the piano very well. She stood up and walked over to Camilla. She asked very politely, "May I play the piano for a little bit, please?" Camilla looked over her shoulder and seemed surprised. "The piano?" she asked. "Yes," Charlotte said with a hopeful look. "I will play very quietly so I don't disturb anyone." Camilla took a slow sip of her water and looked right into Charlotte's eyes. In a sharp voice, she said, "Darling, that is not necessary at all. Let the adults have some peace and quiet. Why don't you go back to your chair and sit still like a proper young lady should?" Camilla wasn't shouting, but her words were very pointed. They were meant to make Charlotte feel like she was doing something wrong just by asking a question. It was a very unkind way to talk to a child. Adults sometimes don't realize how much their words can hurt. The sharp tone made Charlotte's face turn red with embarrassment. She felt like everyone in the room was looking at her and thinking she was a bad girl. She slowly went back to her chair, closed her book, and folded her hands in her lap. She didn't say another word. Catherine had been standing nearby talking to a lady named Lady Lansdowne. She heard every single word Camilla said. She didn't say anything yet, but her eyes moved quickly from Charlotte to Camilla. She stared at Camilla for a long time, much longer than usual. Camilla noticed the stare and looked at Catherine. For a brief second, their eyes met, and it felt like a cold wind had blown through the room. Camilla looked away quickly and started talking to someone else. The room went back to being busy, but the feeling in the air had changed completely. It wasn't a happy family gathering anymore. It felt like a storm was coming. That night when they were finally back at their own home, Adelaide Cottage, the house was very peaceful. The big castle was far away and they could finally breathe easily. Prince William was in his office finishing a phone call and Prince George was already tucked into bed and fast asleep. Catherine went into Charlotte's room to say goodnight. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her daughter. She asked gently, "Did you feel sad or upset today, Charlotte?" Charlotte looked a little bit unsure. She didn't want to make her mom worried. "A little bit," she whispered, "but I think I'm okay." Catherine took her hand and said, "You don't have to pretend with me. I saw what happened and I want to know how you feel." Charlotte nodded and the truth came out. "Granny Camilla doesn't like it when I talk. She makes me feel like I am being annoying or too loud even when I am trying to be good." There it was. It was very simple and very sad. Charlotte was just being a normal girl, but she was being made to feel like she was a problem. Catherine kissed her daughter's forehead and told her she loved her very much. Then she stood up and walked down the hallway to find William. When Catherine passed by the study, William looked up from his desk. He could see that his wife had something important on her mind. "Is Charlotte okay?" he asked. "She is trying her best to be okay," Catherine replied. William leaned back in his chair and looked concerned. "What happened today? I feel like I missed something." Catherine sat down and told him everything. She didn't sound angry or loud. She spoke very clearly and told him every detail. She told him about the comment in the hallway, the scone at the snack table, and the sharp words about the piano. She explained how Camilla was trying to make Charlotte feel small and quiet. She told him that Charlotte was starting to lose her confidence because of these mean remarks. William listened very carefully. He didn't interrupt her at all. When Catherine was finished, he looked very serious. His jaw was tight, which meant he was feeling very strong emotions. Catherine looked at him and said, "This is not something we can just let go. We have to do something." William nodded and said, "I agree with you. We will handle this, but we must be very careful about how we do it." The very next morning, Catherine did something very bold. She called the palace and told them that Charlotte would not be going to the next event on the calendar. It was a special gardening project for charity that Queen Camilla had organized for all the royal grandchildren. Catherine made up a small excuse and said that Charlotte had a little cold and needed to stay home and rest. But the truth was that Catherine did not want her daughter to be around Camilla again until things were fixed. She wanted Charlotte to be in a safe place where people would be kind to her. When the news reached Queen Camilla that Charlotte wasn't coming, she didn't say much in front of people. She just raised one eyebrow and looked at her helper. But then she whispered something under her breath. She said, "I guess she is too delicate to get a little bit of mud on her dress." Catherine found out about that comment too. In the royal houses, people talk a lot and secrets don't stay secret for very long. Catherine realized that the situation was getting worse, and she knew she had to stand her ground even more. Things might have stayed quiet for a while, but then something happened the very next weekend. King Charles had invited William and Catherine to a small, private dinner at his house called Highgrove. He wanted everyone to have a relaxed evening together as a family. He wanted to talk about their upcoming trips to other countries and just spend some time with his son and daughter-in-law. The plan was very simple and nice. But when Catherine walked into the main room with Charlotte, things got tense very quickly. Charlotte had just come into the room to say a quick goodnight to her grandfather before she went to bed. Queen Camilla was sitting by the fire, and she didn't even look up when they walked in. Charlotte walked over to her with a polite smile and said, "Good evening, Granny." Camilla didn't smile back at all. Instead, she looked at the clock and said, "Are you sure you aren't too tired to be down here? It's getting very late for a little girl." It was a mean thing to say, and everyone in the room could hear the sharp edge in her voice. This time, Catherine didn't wait until they were home to say something. She didn't even look away. She just stood there, and her stillness made the whole room feel different. The nice, polite smile she usually wore was completely gone. Her face looked very serious and strong. She looked at Charlotte and said in a very calm voice, "Why don't you give Grandpa a big hug and then go upstairs with your nanny, Anna?" Charlotte looked a little bit confused, but she did what her mother asked. She gave King Charles a hug, and he whispered something sweet to her. Then she left the room, and the door clicked shut. For a few seconds, it was completely silent in the room. No one knew what to say. Queen Camilla sat back in her chair and took a sip of her wine. She looked around and said in a light voice, "Well, she is a very sensitive girl, isn't she?" When she said that, William froze in his seat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. King Charles looked very uncomfortable and shifted around in his chair. He didn't like it when people in his family were fighting. But Catherine was not going to be quiet this time. She stepped forward and looked right at Camilla. Every word she spoke was chosen very carefully. She said, "No, she is not too sensitive. She is a child, and every child deserves to be spoken to with kindness and respect." Camilla looked surprised. She raised her eyebrows and said, "I didn't mean anything bad by it. I was just surprised she was still awake. It's not something to get so upset about." But Catherine did not blink. She didn't look away for even a second. She said, "It wasn't just about tonight. This has been happening for many weeks. I have heard the things you have said to her, and Charlotte has heard them too. She knows when someone is being unkind to her." The room felt like it was getting colder and colder. King Charles tried to stop the argument. He said, "Maybe we should all just calm down and talk about something else." But Catherine wasn't done. She interrupted him in a very firm but polite way. She said, "If it were just one little comment, we could move on. But it is not just one comment. It is a pattern of behavior, and I will not stand by and watch while my daughter is made to feel like she is less important than anyone else." Camilla looked at William, hoping he would tell his wife to stop. But William stayed completely silent. He didn't say a word, and his silence told everyone that he was on Catherine's side. Catherine continued speaking. She said, "I have tried very hard to keep the peace in this family. I have followed all the rules because that is what I am supposed to do. I have ignored many moments that didn't feel right to me. But this is different. This involves my daughter's happiness and her confidence. I will not let anyone, no matter who they are, try to make her feel bad about herself." Camilla finally leaned forward and set her glass down on the table. She said, "You are making a big deal out of nothing. You always take things way too seriously. Children are tough. They can handle a little bit of criticism." Catherine's face did not change at all. She said, "Children remember how people talk to them. They especially remember how the people who are supposed to protect them talk to them. They should feel safe and loved in their own family." There was no shouting and no drama. Catherine didn't need to yell to show she was powerful. Her voice was strong because she was telling the truth. She had drawn a line in the sand, and she was letting everyone know they could not cross it. William finally spoke up. He said, "We are just asking for basic respect. Charlotte is a good girl and she hasn't done anything wrong. She's just being herself, and that should never be a problem for anyone." Camilla looked at King Charles, but he was looking down at the floor. He knew that Catherine was right, and he didn't want to get into the middle of the fight. He knew that when Catherine decided something was important, she would not change her mind. Catherine had set a boundary, and there was no going back now. After a few more minutes of heavy silence, Catherine excused herself and left the room. William followed her out a few moments later. They didn't want to stay in a room where people were being unkind. They wanted to go be with their children where they felt safe and happy. Catherine went back upstairs to Charlotte's room. She sat by her bed again, but this time she didn't ask if she was okay. She just took Charlotte's hand and held it tight. She said, "You did absolutely nothing wrong today. You were polite and you were kind. That is all I will ever ask you to be." Charlotte looked up at her mom with her big eyes and said, "I really tried to be good, Mommy." Catherine smiled and said, "You don't ever have to try to be perfect, you just have to be yourself." "That is more than enough." Downstairs, King Charles was trying to talk about something else to make the tension go away. Queen Camilla didn't say much for the rest of the evening. She didn't say she was sorry, but she also didn't try to defend herself anymore. She realized that she had pushed Catherine too far, and she saw that she couldn't win this fight. Later that night, Catherine and William talked in their own room. Catherine was still acting very steady and strong, but she was also very tired. "It is hard work to have to fight for your children." She told William, "She doesn't have to like me, I don't care about that, but she must treat Charlotte with respect. That is something I will not negotiate on." William looked at her and said, "She will. We are not going to let this happen anymore. We are a team and we will protect our family." The days after that were very polite, but things felt different. The next big event was a school recital for Charlotte. Catherine made the decision to only invite the immediate family. She did not invite Queen Camilla. The palace told the news that Camilla couldn't come because she had a scheduling conflict, which means she was too busy with other things. But the people inside the palace knew the real reason. They knew that Catherine was keeping her daughter away from anyone who was mean to her. In the newspapers and on the news, everything looked the same. The royal family released pictures of everyone smiling and looking happy. They wanted the world to think they were all a big, happy family. But inside the castle walls, things had shifted. Queen Camilla was still at all the big events, but she stayed far away from Princess Charlotte. She didn't make any more mean remarks, and she didn't give her any cold looks. At least, she didn't do those things when Catherine was around. Catherine had drawn a very clear boundary. Even in a family that is hundreds of years old and has many complicated rules, there are some lines you just cannot cross. If you cross a mother's line, there will be consequences. But things weren't completely settled yet. Queen Camilla had heard the warning, and she was following the rules for now. But she hadn't forgotten what happened. The next time the whole family was together was during the summer at a place called Balmoral in Scotland. Balmoral has always been a special place for King Charles. He loves to go there to go for long walks, and get away from all the cameras and the news. For many years, it was the favorite place of the old queen, and the family still goes there every summer because it is a tradition. But this year, even the fresh air of Scotland couldn't hide the fact that things had changed. Catherine had agreed to come to Balmoral, but she came with her own set of rules. She and William brought all three of their children, but Catherine had told William that she would never leave Charlotte alone with Camilla, not even for 1 minute. Everyone arrived at the estate at different times over a few days. King Charles was the first one to say hello to them. He was very happy and had his arms open wide to give everyone a hug. He loves his grandchildren very much and always looks forward to playing with them. Queen Camilla arrived a day later with all her helpers and her fancy clothes. She had been very quiet since the big argument at the dinner. She hadn't talked to Catherine at all except to say hello or goodbye at big public events. Everyone was trying to act like everything was normal. They didn't want to ruin the summer vacation. The first few days at Balmoral were very peaceful. They went for long walks, they rode horses, and they had dinners full of laughter. Charlotte started to feel like herself again. Catherine saw her daughter chatting at breakfast and running through the green fields with George and Louis. Charlotte even helped one of the kitchen workers bake some scones one afternoon. It seemed like the bad times were finally over. But then the moment came. Catherine was in a big room with some of her friends and helpers. William had gone fishing with his father, King Charles. The children were playing out in the big garden, and 2 workers were watching them to make sure they were safe. This was the first time since they arrived that Catherine hadn't been right next to her children for more than 5 minutes. Suddenly, one of the helpers leaned in and whispered to Catherine. She said, "I think Princess Charlotte is in the sunroom with the Queen." As soon as Catherine heard those words, she stood up very straight. She didn't move right away, but her heart started to beat faster. She excused herself without saying where she was going and walked very quickly toward the sunroom. As she got closer to the door, she could hear voices coming from inside. One was Camilla's voice, and the other was Charlotte's. Catherine stopped for a second to listen to what was being said. She heard Camilla saying, "We don't always need to talk over other people, Charlotte. It is very important to learn how to listen. Sometimes your mommy forgets that too." Charlotte didn't say a word back. Catherine didn't wait any longer. She opened the door and walked right in. Camilla looked up and seemed very surprised to see her. Catherine spoke in a very even voice and said, "There you are, Charlotte. I was looking for you, my darling." Charlotte stood up right away and walked to her mother's side. Camilla looked at Catherine and said in a light voice, "I was just having a little chat with her." But her voice had a sharp edge to it, like a knife. Catherine looked right at her and said, "I heard what you were saying." Camilla raised her eyebrows and said, "I was just..." But Catherine didn't let her finish. She was still calm, but her voice was very strong. She said she was just being a child. She does not need to be corrected and told she is doing something wrong every single time she opens her mouth to speak. Camilla folded her arms across her chest and said, I have raised children of my own. I know when a girl is growing up too fast and needs to be taught some manners. Catherine looked her right in the eye and said, she is growing up just fine, and she's going to grow up without being made to feel like she is a problem or a burden to this family. There was no yelling and no one was crying, but Catherine was being very, very clear. She said, I would like it if everyone around her could show a little bit more kindness. I don't think that is too much to ask from a family. Camilla didn't say anything back. She just stayed quiet and looked at Catherine. But Catherine didn't care what Camilla thought anymore. She had spent a long time trying to protect the royal family and follow all the old traditions. But now, she realized that protecting her daughter was much more important than any old rule. After they left the sunroom, Catherine knelt down next to Charlotte in the hallway. She whispered, You did absolutely nothing wrong, okay? Charlotte gave a small nod, but Catherine could see that her eyes were a little bit watery, like she was about to cry. Catherine told her, You never ever need to be afraid to speak up and say what you think. Your voice is important. By the end of that week, all the workers in the palace had noticed that something was different. Queen Camilla was staying far away from the children. When it was time to eat, she sat at the other end of the table. She didn't say anything about how the kids were acting, what they were wearing, or how they were talking. It was a very small change, but in the world of the royal family, even small changes are a big deal. Catherine hadn't caused a giant scene or a scandal. She hadn't done anything that would be in the newspapers, but she had drawn a line that no one could miss. Even King Charles, who wanted everyone to get along, knew that he should not get involved. He loved both Catherine and Camilla, but he understood that when Catherine stood up for herself, she was doing it for a good reason. He knew that she was finished with the argument, and her decision was final. That summer at Balmoral ended with the same kind of photos they always take. The whole family stood on the castle steps and smiled for the cameras. They waved at the people who had come to see them. To the rest of the world, they looked like a perfect, happy family that was all on the same team. But on the inside, things were very different. Queen Camilla had lost something she didn't even know she was losing. She had lost Catherine's willingness to just put up with things to make everything look good. Catherine was done with that. She was no longer going to stay quiet just to be polite. She had made sure that her daughter would never feel small or unimportant in her own family ever again. A mother's love is a very powerful thing, and even a queen cannot stand in its way. What would you have done if you were Catherine? Do you think Camilla was being too mean, or was she just from a different time when people were more strict? It is a very interesting question to think about. Family can be complicated, especially when you live in a palace. We would love to hear what you think about this story. You can share your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you can see more stories like this one. You can also click on the next video you see on your screen to learn more about the royal family and their secrets.